Well, good morning. Thank you so much to Jerry and Debbie for that warm welcome this morning. And again, I want to welcome everybody to Campus View live stream. I want to start by just thanking so many of you who have texted both Kyle and myself to encourage us during this time of practicing a very different way of doing our job, preaching and teaching, doing that through cameras and computers and technology, rather than being on stage with all of you out in an audience with us. And so, just really want to say thank you so much for all the warm encouragement that's come from so many of you. So thank you. We're going to veer off a little bit and take a break from our Acts series, and we'll jump back into it soon. I wanted to start by asking you, what are some of the first words that come to your mind? Are you ready? Some of the first words that come to your mind when you hear the word pandemic. All right, just think about that for a second. What are some of the first words that pop into your mind? Pandemic. Maybe some of the first words you think of are disease, virus, or even death. Pandemic, it sounds like a very scary word. When I heard the word pandemic for the first time, I thought it had to do with deadly sickness, and I think probably many of us think of it that way. We are currently in a global pandemic. There is a virus that has spread throughout the world, throughout our world right now, and people are scared. People are afraid. They're frightened. People are getting sick, and there are people who are dying. Pandemic is a very scary word. What I'm hoping to do this morning is to get us somehow, some way to redefine pandemic in our hearts and in our minds. Pandemic is defined as something, not a sickness, not an illness, but something that occurs over a wide geographic area and affects an exceptionally high proportion of the population. When you hear the word pandemic or global pandemic on the news, or you read about it in the paper, or you hear about it or read about it on social media, I want you to forever associate it with something other than fear, sickness, or death. When you hear the word pandemic, I want you to think about faith, right? We hear that word every day, pandemic, pandemic. Well, I want you to consciously think about this. When you hear it on the news, or you hear it on social media, or you read it in the paper, when you see pandemic, I want you to think about faith. And not just faith, but global faith. Why does pandemic always have to be something bad that's being spread? That's just sort of how we've defined it, but why does it have to be that way? Why can't we have a pandemic of faith? I recognize that I have a pretty lofty task ahead of me this morning in order to accomplish getting you to associate pandemic with faith. But I believe I can do it. Are you with me on that? I can't hear you, but I'm sure you are all like, yeah, Jarrod, we're with you. But I think I might be able to reach some of you and somehow convince you that when you hear pandemic, you think about faith. I don't believe that we as Christians are supposed to be paralyzed. I don't think right now that we're supposed to be crippled during this time. The pandemic, as it's currently defined, is doing enough to wreck the hearts and minds of millions of people as we speak. It's even reached into the hearts of many disciples and has pulled out some stuff that I would say not many of us would be proud of. I was challenged this week from a podcast by John Eldredge that I was encouraged to listen to by some brothers. And so I jumped on and I listened to this podcast. And one of the things that John said, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that in the first few weeks of quarantine, of self-isolation, of this pandemic, the first couple of weeks, all he could think about was how this was going to interfere with his family vacation. That maybe this thing is going to keep him and his family from being able to go on their family vacation. And when I heard this, I was disgusted. No, not really. When I heard this, I was convicted because John Eldredge nailed me to the wall on this one. So Chloe is graduating from high school, and we have been planning a senior trip for her for several months, and we had booked our cruise tickets on Carnival for the whole family to go and get on a big ship, all inclusive, all you can eat, in a room with a window, ocean view. And we were going to hop from island to island, and we were going to have a great time. And all we could think about in the first few weeks of this pandemic is, oh no, what about our family vacation? What about Chloe's senior trip? This pandemic has been an inconvenience for me. I've tried to put on the face of an angel. And honestly, I have, having been scattered, I have tried to reach out to my neighbors. I'm trying to practice what I'm preaching. And I don't think I've failed tremendously. Honestly, I'm doing the best I can, just as much as I think probably many of you are. But this dumb virus has managed to steal some things from me and steal some things from my family. It has stolen, from my perspective, Chloe's senior year and her graduation. And to be able to experience what most seniors get to experience when they're getting ready to graduate from high school. It has stolen our cruise in May. It's stolen Reese's freshman year. She's just gotten really good at lacrosse, and she was into her first several games, and it was stolen from her. What an inconvenience. Tatum's flag football. We had our first practice the week before we were encouraged to self-isolate. Gone. The season is over. What an inconvenience. It made me mad. I love coaching Tatum's flag football team. I love watching this kid play. I love him being able to do it. His birthday is next week, and I feel like it's been stolen from him. That all of his friends aren't going to be able to come over and have a pool party and be able to open presents and eat cake together and blow out all of his candles. It's been stolen. And not to mention the college football season this fall. College football. Florida Gators, Clemson Tigers, Georgia Bulldogs, all of it stolen. And I could go on and on about the inconveniences of this pandemic. I've even been praying about these things. Since this time has started, I've been praying, God, please, I pray for all of these things to be able to happen. Please bring them back to us. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says this. It says, now faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. But maybe what I haven't realized is that one of the greatest things that this pandemic has stolen from me is my faith. What is it that I've really been hoping for? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. just what have I really been hoping for? And honestly, in a lot of ways, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I don't even want to tell you all those things. I sort of already did. I'm not sure that I've been hoping for the right things. And if that's the case, then what kind of faith am I spreading to others? We're in the midst of a global pandemic, an outbreak of a virus that has occurred over a wide geographic area and has affected an exceptionally high proportion of people. The spread of this virus seems to have also spread something else with it. Faithlessness. It spread faithlessness along with it. Or hope in the wrong things. For me, inconvenience. How it's affected me. How it's affected my family. For others, maybe it's fear. Or maybe it's anxiety. Or maybe it's blame. And what do? We spread this to others. Just like a virus. We sneeze it onto people. We breathe it onto people. We speak it into their hearts and we speak it into their minds. And it becomes a pandemic. Why? Because it's infectious. Our faithlessness, our negativity, it's infectious. The whole reason we're isolating ourselves from others is so that we don't spread sickness to someone else. And a virus isn't the only sickness that we can spread. We really can cause a pandemic of faithlessness. What we have the power to do, if we really wanted to, is to release a pandemic of faith. We have that power. But are we thinking about doing that? Are we considering that really? Because faith, it is infectious. And that's what I want us to come away with this morning. So, question. Do you believe in the best when it comes to God? Do you believe that God is sovereign? Do you believe that God is just? Do you believe that God is right? Do you believe that? Do you believe that He truly does have your very best interest at heart? Do you believe that He has the very best interest of every man and woman on this planet at heart? And for that matter, all the children. Do you believe He has everyone's best interest at heart? Do you believe it when you read in Romans chapter 28? And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Do you believe it? I know it can be hard to feel, especially when we're faced with some very difficult situations or under stressful circumstances. I know it can be hard. But think about it. Is your faith in God a strong faith? Do you have a solid, strong faith in God that is unwavering? Having a solid, strong faith in God doesn't mean that you aren't going to feel things. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to have your moments of sadness or fear or helplessness or even despair. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to be taken to the very limits of what you think you can handle. You can have an incredibly strong faith in God and still feel these things and even go through things that may lead some people to believe that you're cursed by God. Throughout history, going back to the very early church and even further back to the Old Testament times, there have been some of the most faithful of men and women, God's people, who have found themselves in desperate situations, who had been brought to their knees, and yet have been some of God's most faithful saints. Jesus even falls into this category. In Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 37, it says, Jesus took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." You know, Jesus was not a faithless man in this moment. You know, he was dealing with some very real feelings. He was dealing with some very real emotions. But he trusted God. He trusted his Father, and he trusted that he was working for the good. I'm not sure that we believe that. Or if we do believe it, we've forgotten it. Or maybe we believe it, we haven't forgotten it, but maybe we just ignore it. You know, God is working for our good. I want to camp out here in Matthew chapter 26. And I want us to explore some things here. So how was it for Jesus' 12 faithful? You know, I would say that for the most part, you know, as Jesus had called them and pulled them together and they started this ministry, within these 3 years that Jesus was doing his thing and training these guys up, I would say that they had it pretty good. You know, they were with Jesus. Imagine that. Imagine day and night being with the Son of God, being with the Messiah. They had it pretty good. You know, they had a new calling to be fishers of men. How exciting that was. They dropped their nets and followed Jesus to become fishers of men. You know, to see miracles, you know, to be a part of something great, sitting at the feet of a man whom they can learn from, ministering to people, getting to hang out with the boys every day. How great would that be? Untethered by life's demands, untethered by life's routines. Sure, they were going to go head to head with some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you know, guys that they had grown up being taught to highly respect, but they were doing it following Jesus. And I think in some ways that was probably very exciting for them. You know, I might even go as far as to say that things in those 3 years of Jesus' ministry got pretty comfortable for the 12. But where did all that comfort go? I wonder. Turn over in your Bibles, if you have one with you, to Matthew chapter 26. And we're going to read here a little bit about where that comfort went. In Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 47. It says, "While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. 'The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him.' Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and he kissed him. Jesus replied, 'Friend, do what you came for.' Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. And with that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. 'Put your sword back in its place,' Jesus said to him, 'for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But then how would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way?' At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, 'Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat at the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled.' Then all the disciples deserted him and fled." Wow. Where did the comfort go? Because I think for them, this was unexpected. What happened to the amazing things these guys were a part of? What happened to this new calling that they had received, to be fishers of men? the miracles, the good teaching, the ministering to people, where did that go? The hanging out with the boys, the starting of a movement, what happened? And where's the comfort now? I mean, you can imagine the scene. I mean, earlier that night, lounging around a table, eating good, choice, morseled food, drinking wine, Jesus breaking bread with his disciples. Now, he said a few disturbing things that caught him off guard, but then after that, Jesus says, hey, I need to go pray and spend some time with my Father. And he pulls Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he goes and he asks them to keep watch for him while he prays, and he goes and he prays, and Jesus is overwhelmed with sorrow, it says, to the point of death. Right? And after a few times of him coming back to his best friends and finding them sleeping, he says, come, rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. And so then Peter and the disciples and Jesus, there they are in the garden, and Judas brings soldiers to arrest Jesus. And all of a sudden, everything begins to change. Peter, indignant, he pulls out a sword, he cuts off the servant of the high priest's ear, and Jesus says, whoa, stop it. Don't do that, Peter. He says, all who draw the sword will die by the sword. And Jesus leans down and he picks up the ear and he places it back on the servant's head. That's astonishing. And I think in that moment, I think Peter and the other disciples, they realized it's different now. Things are about to change. This isn't what we had signed up for. And it says they all deserted him and they fled. Jesus tried to tell Peter and the other apostles earlier that it's going to get uncomfortable. Things are going to be different. In Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 21, it says, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord! This will never happen to you. He says, no way. Dude, come on, we've got it so good. Man, the thing that you've pulled together here for us, why would we want to disrupt that? Why would we want to change that? Man, we are on a roll. Jesus turned to Peter and he said to him, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. He says, you are a stumbling block. You do not have in mind the things of God. You only have in your mind the things of men. Have we become a stumbling block to Jesus and to his ministry that he's given us? Christianity, I'm afraid, has become a religion of comfort. Not everywhere, but I believe it has here. And I fear even among some of us. This pandemic has been an inconvenience for me. I'm ashamed to say, but I'm telling you, it is revealing some stuff in my own heart and in my own mind. And my guess is it's revealing some things in you as well. It's a blessing if I'm able to take my family on a vacation together. It's a blessing if we're able to book tickets on a cruise. It's a blessing. It's a blessing that my son gets to play his sports and play with his friends. Or that we have things like college football to enjoy, or the NFL, or whatever sport you enjoy to watch. It's a blessing to have jobs that enable us to put roofs over our heads and food on our table. It's a blessing. It's a blessing that if we become sick, we're able to go see a doctor. It's a blessing. I wonder, does my faith really recognize these things? And does it really understand what a blessing those things are? What if Jesus just let go? What if he didn't respond to Peter's lack of faith? Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you. And what if Jesus' response was, okay, Peter. And that was it. There was already a pandemic of faithlessness that had consumed the world. And not just the entire world, it even consumed the religious world. But Jesus was training these guys and getting them ready to spread a global pandemic of faith. It was the whole reason for the church being established when it was established. It wasn't established so that its members could be comfortable, so that they wouldn't be inconvenienced in some way, or to give in to fear when famine came, or persecution broke out, or sickness came into play, or whatever. Jesus was getting these guys ready to spread a global pandemic of faith. Now again, let me be clear. If you feel fear right now, or if you are feeling sorrow, or if you are feeling a helplessness or a despair, I just want to be clear. That's not faithlessness. Those are real feelings that you have. So, what I want to encourage you with, it's what you do with that fear or the sorrow and the helplessness that you feel when you feel it that will determine your faith. I don't know where you are this morning. I'm pretty sure, though, that we're probably all over the map when it comes to how we're seeing things right now, to what's going on in our hearts and what's going on in our minds. Some of us, maybe it's easy like Sunday morning, but maybe for some of us, this is really, really hard. I think we're probably all over the map. My faith is being tested right now. And whether you've thought about it or whether you think it is or not, your faith right now is being tested. It's interesting. There's a lot of controversy right now that's going on regarding the testing of people and COVID-19. And so anyway, I pulled up this article and I thought it was really interesting. And as I read it, let me do this. Let me just read it to you. And I want you to listen to it. And then I'll try to explain some things, okay? So just listen to this article and hear me out. Stay with me. All right, it says this. It says, the problem is that tests almost never have 100% sensitivity and 100% specificity. The test and the truth together create 4 possibilities: true positives, true negatives, false positives, and false negatives. There's a trade-off involved because an increasingly liberal test, or more sensitive, will include more and more individuals in the population who do not actually have the disease, less specific. This trade-off has important implications for interpreting COVID-19 population trends based on testing to date and going forward. For COVID-19 testing, the threshold for calling a test positive should not be set too high. Failing to isolate someone who actually has COVID-19 and sending them back to a nursing home would be putting many people in harm's way. But if the bar for calling a test positive is set too low, then a subset of patients who do not have COVID-19 will test positive for it. There's also a counting problem. If the virus is widespread, which it may be, the more COVID-19 testing that is done, the more cases of COVID-19 we will find. When the World Health Organization states that it took 67 days from the first reported case to reach the first 100,000 cases of COVID-19, it took only 11 days for the second 100,000 cases and just 4 days for the third 100,000 cases. We must recognize that part of that rise may be due to increased testing. Okay. So what does all of that mean? You probably just listened to everything I said and you know exactly what I just said. Well, honestly, I don't really know. But when I read it, it sounded really smart and it sounded really right. And as I was thinking about it more and more, I was like, yeah, I think I can tie this into my sermon. All right, here's the bottom line. Our faith is being tested right now. But when being tested, 100% of us don't always respond the right way to the testing that we've received. You're not necessarily responding correctly to the testing right now that you're receiving in your faith. And there's a percentage of us where faith just doesn't show up at first at all. It takes time for our faith to be revealed in the results of the testing. It just takes time, but we get there. But if you put a lot of folks together who have been tested positive in their faith, then that faith, guaranteed, is going to spread. Did you catch all that? All right. You can go back later and rewatch this and try to make sense of all of it. But I think that sort of makes sense. If you put a lot of folks together who have tested positive in their faith, that you are faithful, and we come together as a faithful brotherhood, we're going to spread this infection of faith. And that's what we want to happen. A pandemic of faith that spreads through Campus View Church, that spreads through our homes, that spreads through our communities, through Gainesville, until it becomes a global pandemic. Look, maybe you had no idea what that article was saying. And like I said, I'm not sure I did. But look, this is all you need to know. The world right now needs you. It needs all of us. Your family needs you. Your husband, your wife, your children, your mom, your dad need you. Your friends, they need you. Your neighbors, they need you. Right now, we're being told to self-isolate, but we need to bring our faith together and spread its infection. It doesn't matter if we don't get to go on our family vacation or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if our kids get to go to teen camp or not, or swamp camp or not. It really, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Tatum isn't going to get to play flag football this spring. It doesn't really matter, honestly, that Chloe isn't going to walk for her graduation in a normal way. Now maybe they'll do it later, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Not really. It doesn't matter if we don't have college football. It doesn't matter. Now, I know that maybe some of you have just turned, or you're about to turn off your live stream because I said that. But it doesn't matter. Not really if you don't get your NFL, if we're not going to get to see baseball, if we're not going to get to see, whatever entertainment you enjoy. It just doesn't matter. I shouldn't care if this pandemic has inconvenienced me in some way. and you shouldn't care either. You know, there are more important things right now that we should be hoping for. I mean, shouldn't we be hoping for people to be healed? Shouldn't we be hoping that God will teach us what we need to learn? Shouldn't we be hoping for our hearts to change and become more and more of what God wants our hearts to be? I mean, what is it really that we're hoping for? If you're struggling with fear or sorrow, or you're feeling helpless, those are real feelings. But I want to encourage you to fight those feelings. I want to encourage you to push through and be faithful. You know, what an inspiration that you would be to others if you were able to do that. What an inspiration all of us would be if together we grew in our faith and we began a global pandemic of faith. Imagine that. Let's not be spoiled or too comfortable or let fear or sorrow keep us from starting a global pandemic of faith. Brothers and sisters, friends, I hope this morning that this message has helped. And I hope that you are encouraged, but I hope also that in some way you're convicted, because I know I've been. Just want to remind you on Wednesday, jump back on here at Facebook, on Facebook Live, to be able to see Kyle continue on with his series on Daniel. And then also join us next Sunday right back here at 10:30 a.m. for Campus View live stream. Love you.